What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by special guest, friend of the show, Lance Brozdowski, who is coming to us live from the winter meetings. Lance, we appreciate the time and taking a few minutes to join us.
Always, yeah. I'm in this weird rotunda thing. Yeah, this place is weird. Any winter meetings hotel you go to, they all have like these very distinct features. This one's like a little smaller, and that's caused a lot of like overlap in terms of I think people coming down from like GM offices and running into people. So I imagine the rate at which GMs and other people have left their rooms is lower than prior years. Nashville was like this maze, this like jungle maze in the middle of nowhere. So I enjoy experiencing all these random hotels I'll probably never come to again.
I love it. Well, I've got 5 questions for you, and I'll start with kind of what you're talking about already. You're at the winter meeting, so what's the buzz? I mean, obviously, we're a Dodgers-specific show, so anything Dodgers-related, but in general, lots of movement so far. What's the buzz been like?
Yeah, today was pretty cool with the crochet trade. I didn't think that was going to happen so quickly, I guess, but it seems like the Red Sox really accelerated their offer right after Fried signed, which I know they were in on Fried. Obviously, we've been reported. But I mean, for your Dodgers, like you guys got going early, right? You got the Snell move out of the way. Like I imagine Friedman and Gomes are just hanging around and having some drinks and not really too pressured here. But there's always moves to make though, so we'll get into those.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that one because that was going to be my second question for you. Is you mentioned Max Fried, you mentioned Blake Snell. I want to get specifics on Snell, but first, I'd love to get your thoughts on these two guys. Were 2 of the top 3 starters on the market. If we move Roki Sasaki into a separate conversation. A lot of people on our show preferred Blake Snell to Max Fried. And so now that we know both of the contracts of these two guys, Blake Snell, 5 years, $180 million with some deferrals. So, whatever. If you want to do the luxury tax numbers, it's like 160 versus Max Fried, who gets 3 extra years and $35 extra million compared to Snell. What's your immediate reaction to those 2 contracts? Did one team kind of do better than the other?
I mean, I prefer the Snell contract primarily because I prefer Snell as a pitcher relative to Fried.
Yeah.
And so I'd be in line with these other people you're talking to. And I think most of the industry is kind of on that same pulse here. I think the thing with Snell is like you look at the aggregate performance last year and it looks fine, but it wasn't the prior year and it wasn't the prior Cy Young year he had in Tampa. And that was probably a byproduct of him just starting very late. He was very vocal about that in season. So I just, the thing with a lot of the time, we like split seasons in half and we go, this guy did this in the second half. So of course we're just going to extrapolate that for a full season in the next year, like it's as easy as that. But the reality is when you zoom out and look at data like that, it's more predictive to just take the entire season. No one half is generally more predictive unless you can find something in the half that you can convince yourself is something this guy will do going forward. And I think that's the case with Snell, where you can just look at the first half and go, okay, he was off, started late, etc. It was bad. Then he IL'd, came back, and he was great. And I think that's who Blake Snell is. I love the fact that he has 4 pitches. I love the fact that it seems like every single year he's leaning on one of them more. I just like that from the pure approach standpoint of not really leaning on 1 or 2 pitches and having to go towards that route. He has the ability to lean on the curveball more one year versus a different lineup, lean on the changeup more. He always seems like he's playing with the slider. I imagine that's something the Dodgers will try to help him out with, ins and outs and that pitch being a lead. And I just think he's a better pitcher overall, and we've seen higher highs. Fried, flexor strain, generally predictive of some kind of Tommy John. I think you're building in some kind of TJ over the next however many years in that contract, probably just 1. I like him. He's just a weirder pitcher. He, to me, feels a little bit more maxed out based on how diverse his mix is already. Like Snell's throwing 4 pitches. Fried at the beginning of the year started throwing the sweeper. I didn't think he really needed it. He had a second slider. He says the nasty curveball, which has been a really good pitch for a while, but it seems like to some extent he's already pulled out all his tricks and now it's a matter of mastering them. Whereas Snell, I think, is just this really unique pitcher who people maybe don't think really has command, but I really think he just doesn't want to throw bad pitches and hit advantageous counts. So the injury element, the pure stuff grade, the velo, I think it's pretty clear to lean Snell, and the cost difference doesn't make me want to go towards the Fried side. Fried contract isn't bad per se. It's a huge dollar value contract, and the Yankees are smart to spread it over multiple years in case that TJ comes. They still have control of him, and he'll probably be a pretty good pitcher, but I just think there's a better chance that Snell probably wins the Cy Young in the next 3 years than Fried. And I think that's what the Dodgers are shooting for rather than just having control of a guy for a couple more years.
Yeah, you mentioned the command with Snell. I forget who, so I apologize. But somebody did this whole kind of write-up basically about how he actually has great command because he throws less middle pitches than anybody else in Major League Baseball. And how if you're a pitcher like Blake Snell who gets as much swing and miss as he does and as soft to contact as he does, you kind of don't care about walks because moving everybody station to station when you know the next guy's probably going to strike out or pop out or ground out or something soft, like you kind of can live with the walks, which is why he's been able to have such a low batting average on balls in play and have such a low ERA despite the walks. Like, are you entirely bought in on that sort of as, hey, his command is actually not represented by his walk rate?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think he's more like an average commander. I don't think I'd push to say he's great, but like
Okay.
I think he's really good at putting pitches where they succeed. I don't necessarily know if he's good at like dotting pitches all around the zone, because where I'd push more into like the pure great command side. But yeah, I think it's a bit overblown. Like you look at the raw walk rate there, and you just think he's kind of a guy who doesn't really have control or command or anything, and that's just really not the case. He just like he literally refuses to throw bad pitches in hitter advantageous counts. So he's not throwing fastballs when he's behind. If he was to do that, he would end up with more on the walk rate side of things, or excuse me, on the damage side of things specifically, and the walks might come down. But I just think he'd run a higher ERA. And these guys who can strike out near 30% of batters, I think you get behind. The way for you to get back in the count is to let that guy walk to first base. It's not really to try to get back into the count. And I think a lot of like maybe old school pitching heads would be like, I hate walking guys, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, if you have this type of strikeout rate, you can protect yourself against that guy being on base. If you're comfortable with a guy on base, then like it doesn't really matter if you walk a guy. Like I think that's partially overblown based on when you look at the individual characteristics of a given pitcher. And in Snell's case, he's like one of the few pitchers who, when he gets to like 3-0 counts, is just go to first base. Like there's no point in me trying to battle back to get into a 3-1 count where I'm still at a disadvantage to throw you another pitch that you could probably hit. It's like it doesn't make much sense. Different kinds of pitchers, I think you have to push towards that, like a sinker baller, say like a Logan Webb, you guys see a lot. Like behind the count, he's just going to throw you a sinker and he's going to dare you to lift it. But if I'm like Snell, I'm not going to throw you a fastball to try to get back in the count. I'm just going to let you walk to first base and strike out the next batter. That's the advantage of Blake Snell.
I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Top of the Dodgers rotation next year is going to be Snell, Glasnow, and Yamamoto. Would you rank those guys in that order? If everybody's assuming health, Glasnow is sort of a question mark with the elbow thing.
Yeah.
But like, do you think Snell is the best of that group, and then it would go Glasnow and Yamamoto?
I mean, if you're telling me they all throw 180, it's Glasnow, Snell, probably.
Okay.
In my opinion. But
so just again, like when healthy, you think Glasnow, you would take Glasnow over Snell. Yeah.
Per inning basis, I'll take Glasnow over Snell.
Okay.
But the reality is, like, he has not stayed healthy, and he's probably not going to throw 180. So then, if you're an actor in the inning side of things, it's probably Snell, Glasnow, Yamamoto. I'm pretty encouraged by Yamamoto. I think we talked about this in the past too. Like he made some good adjustments mid-season, right before he went down with injury. When he came back, they kind of slow rolled his distribution on the pitch side, and then at the end of the year and into the playoffs, you saw that sweeper more. You saw more sinker coming back. I really think like he enters 2025 with like a more refined approach versus right-handed hitting specifically, where he struggled a little more than left-handed hitting because of the split. And I think there's a chance like he could hop maybe above a Glasnow if you factor in the health side of things. But yeah, I mean, you guys have the gluttony of riches here. Like, any other team would take one of these guys and they'd probably go to the top of the rotation. You have three. It's just it's almost unfair. But West Coast, when the Cub games are over here on the Midwest, I come home and I watch those Dodger games because they're always on for me when you guys are home. So
I laugh as a Dodgers fan. Yeah, as a Dodgers fan, I need to pull my head up, above the water sometimes to just remember. Like I was having an interaction with somebody who was talking about the Dodgers lineup and whether they're going to sign Teoscar, and they're like, "Well, aside from the three guys at the top, like I'm not really impressed by the rest of this lineup." I was like, "Well, the three guys at the top are like probably all top 7 hitters in the league and all Hall of Famers, so it kind of doesn't really matter." It's the same with the pitching rotation. It's like I don't really like the back end. It's like, well, if the top 3 are Snell, Glasnow, and Yamamoto, like I don't think you really have to care all that much about who's number 5.
Does not matter. Agreed.
Let's talk about another guy who, according to, depending on who you read, might be in the mix and might need to be, part of the conversation of the top of the Dodgers rotation. It's a guy that you've done a ton of work on and great work on, and that's Roki Sasaki. I'm not asking you yet whether or not you think he's going to be a Dodger, but you've done a lot of work breaking down his stuff and just how good this guy is. We know he's young. We know he's basically cost nothing. How good is Roki Sasaki, and how good could he, health assumed, potentially be as quickly as 2025?
So I think I'm in the camp more so that I think the impact will be less than people expect in 2025. Okay. I really think that I exist in this world where like I critique this guy a lot. I don't say critique this guy a lot. I say I do a lot of examination of what he does well and doesn't. on the development side. Like, what are you going to do when you get him as an organization? It sounds like he's going into some meetings, I believe, at the end of next week with various teams. I'd be stunned if the Dodgers aren't in that group. I don't know if it's been reported yet. I think the White Sox said they're getting a meeting, which is wild. But maybe just really like Chicago, who knows?
The Rockies too, I believe.
Really? So if he's okay, I thought it was going to be much more selective in terms of him giving meetings. But if he's giving meetings to the Rockies and the White Sox, I'm fascinated to see what that happens. But anyways, in these meetings, my assumption is that this will be the opportunity for the organization to present to Sasaki what they want to do with him. How do we make you into a Cy Young pitcher? And I think multiple organizations are going to have kind of different approaches there, all kind of glomming around the same idea that you got to get the fastball velo back, probably. If not, the fastball velo back is fine sitting 97. We just got to get that shape back to being more like true two plane as opposed to the shape it kind of reverted to in 2024. He probably started cutting the pitch a bit, and that resulted in this splitter that is now this cut splitter, which is really interesting. I mentioned this in the YouTube video I did. I think that'll stick. The wild card is probably the slider. He's starting to pick up a little more sweep on it. I think as a byproduct of trying to cut the pitch a little bit more, cut the fastball a bit more. That maybe leaked into other things in his mix. I don't think he has great spin capacity. Actually, I know he doesn't have good spin capacity. His spin rate was under 2,000 in MPB this most recent season with a tackier ball. So this is like not a raw spin guy like a Yamamoto who's ripping 2,800 RPM sweepers, which is above average. Like Sasaki will be bottom, like 95% of pitchers in baseball will be able to spin a slider better than him unless something is unlocked, which I don't really assume. And that to me limits the capacity for the slider to be very good. So you're going to run into a similar situation with Yamamoto where he's going to be good versus left-handed hitters because of the split. He's going to struggle a bit versus righties. So then it becomes, okay, what do we add here? Is it just ripping the cutter as hard as humanly possible, which I think is the most easy avenue? Maybe there's a team that's like, we can figure out your sweeper even though it's low spin. I don't think that that's the way to go, but more power to an organization that can go in that direction. So you see him like critiquing all these elements of Sasaki. At the end of the day, he's signing for pennies. So none of this matters because if he just picks the team, like it's a value. Even if the guy reverts into a reliever, he's pure fastball split. You know, they start him for 2 years, then they're like, hey man, this is really struggling. You've been hurt, etc. You're now throwing max 70 innings a year. We'll use you in leverage, and he's awesome. Like that's still he's still valuable. He's still huge surplus value from a contract perspective, which is why teams like the White Sox and the Rockies are just like, sure, we will do whatever you want, you know? Yeah. And that's the thing I run into here. It's like I critique and I try to talk about these development points, but at the end of the day, none of it matters because he is a value no matter where he goes. But I just want him to sign because then I could dig more into like, okay, here's how he becomes legit and a really good pitcher, and then we see that development. That's kind of where I'm at with Sasaki.
And to be clear, you use the example of a reliever. Like, are you projecting him to potential? Like, do you think that's a real risk, or are you just saying, hey, even worst case scenario, 10th percentile outcome, he's hurt and it doesn't figure out, then he could be a reliever and it's still value? Or do you think like that's maybe a 50th percentile outcome?
No, I don't think that's a 50th percentile outcome. I just think it's a fallback. I'd say like, you're 10%, 10th percentile, right? Like 90% of the time he starts for 6 years, you have him for control. I'd say 10% of the time he ends up a reliever. Maybe it's like 15, but there's some risk of that, right? Like he's been injured, super electric guy. Like if you can't figure out the righty problem, like teams are going to stack righties against him. And maybe the fastball is good enough to kind of lay off barrels, but he's not going to miss a ton of righty bats. The fastball didn't miss a lot of bats in 2024. But if there's some realm in which you find the 2023 WBC data of his, and you get that over the course of a full season, then I don't think the righty issue matters as much. Yeah. But I'm assuming more so that what we saw in 2024 of him sitting 97 is what we'll see in MLB. If he's out here pumping and sitting 100 and going through 4 or 5 inning stretches, then like I'm completely wrong here. But again, I think of things probabilistically. We talk about, pointing out the percentile outcome here. Like that's kind of how you have to think of these things. And again, I'll emphasize like, wherever he goes, it's a value. And I don't think any of this matters, but he's a fun pitcher. I do think there's some risk in the profile. And like talking to other people in baseball too, like everyone is aware he can't spin a slider. Everyone's aware the fastball regressed. Everyone has theories on it. And it's a matter of like where he goes and their ability to get it back. And I'm more skeptical that certain orgs would be able to do that. Like I think there's a chance he goes to a random team that's great in player development. Like I don't know, like are the Guardians getting a meeting? The Brewers getting a meeting? You guys are fantastic, obviously, at player development. I think the Padres are pretty good at it. Cubs are great at it. White Sox with Bannister, like I'd put Bannister in that meeting. Like that is your token. That dude is a pitching whisperer, and he's the best hire they made in the last couple of years, in my opinion. But like, is that enough to get Sasaki? I don't know. Yeah. Like there's a lot of variables here. I think if I had to predict, I know you're probably about to ask me like, where do you think Sasaki goes? I don't think he's a Dodger, unfortunately. I think he goes somewhere random. I think the highest likelihood is probably the Padres or the Mariners in my head. But I'd love to see like a Guardians, like the
Yeah.
Guardians just pitch him and are like, we are the best at developing all these elements of you as a pitcher. Here's how we get you to be a Cy Young candidate. And then he hangs out there and it's like he dominates. That'd be
Yeah.
fun for me. But I'd imagine it wouldn't be fun for baseball
Yeah.
generally because the exposure there is probably as good as if he went to the West Coast. So
Yeah.
competing
Were you
interests.
like, were you there or did you hear the Joel Wolf, like sort of
Yeah.
media availability that he gave
I
yesterday?
did. Yep.
Okay. Let me give you my tin hat conspiracy theory and you tell me if I'm crazy on this. Okay. Let's say, Lance, hypothetically, as some have speculated, that there's already a handshake deal with the Dodgers for Roki Sasaki to be a Dodger. If that were the case, wouldn't that be the exact media availability that you would give at the winter meetings? You would say, hey, we don't care, small market, big market. It's not about the money. The Padres are a serious contender. Like I joke, he dumped gasoline on every fire that was not the Dodgers. Like, oh, hey, let's play up the Yu Darvish thing because people buying that. And then he dumped water on every fire that involved the Dodgers. No. We don't care about big markets. We don't care about the West Coast. Like all the things that people think Dodgers. He's like, no. These things may not be that important to us. I'm just saying, if hypothetically there was a handshake deal already done and you were trying to cover your tracks, Lance, I think those are the things you would have said. That's all I'm saying.
I kind of like this conspiracy theory. It's a good one. Yeah. If like Manfred called Wolf and was like, you cannot, like, you have to make it seem like this is more competitive than it actually is.
Right.
And Wolf's like, all right, I know how to do that. I'll just pretend that he wants small market. And then like immediately you eliminate the Dodgers. It's the first team you eliminate probably, right? Like that's huge market. New York, you eliminate immediately. So I actually kind of love that tinfoil hat idea. I don't have a counter there. I accept it.
We were talking last night and it was like, well, he's saying all these things to like bring more people to the table. And I'm like, but why would he care about more people coming to the table? Like every team is already there and you're telling us you don't care about money. So he doesn't need to convince like the Cleveland Guardians or the Milwaukee Brewers or the Cubs that they need like, oh, wait, now we have a chance. We'll meet with you. Like he didn't need to say, oh, the West Coast doesn't matter to us. And he didn't need to say like small market, we're open to small markets. That might be better for media purposes. Like he didn't need to say any of that. Those people are already coming. So I'm like, why is he saying these things? Like, why is he saying them out loud? I mean, maybe they're true or, hey, maybe he's just covering his tracks.
No. It'd be really funny if he just signs with the Dodgers and then we go back. I mean, the thing is like no one's going to care about that press conference if he signs with the Dodgers, but I like the concept of like going back to it and being like, this was a masterclass in deception.
That's all I'm saying. Okay, 2 more questions for you before we go. One name that every single Dodgers person that is plugged in keeps saying that is a free agent is relief pitcher Tanner Scott. That's fascinating that Andrew Friedman has historically not gone out and paid, $50 to $60 million for a relief pitcher, what Scott is estimated to get. But give me I would love to hear just your thoughts on Tanner Scott, the pitcher. Like, is he worth the amount of money that he's going to sign for and how he might fit within a Dodgers bullpen that already has Kopech and Trinan and Evan Phillips?
Yeah. My idea here from perceiving what the Dodgers are trying to do is like this team is so locked to just enter the playoffs that I really think like a lot of their season sometimes is just based off you want a tinfoil hat idea. Most of the in-season stuff I think the Dodgers do is all based on creating deceptive scouting and advance reports for teams that then face them in the playoffs, right? Where it's like, oh, this guy, July, August, September, Yamamoto stopped throwing the sweeper. Like, do we think he's going to throw in the postseason? And he goes and throws it 30% of the time, And it's like, I love that stuff. I think that if I was the Dodgers, I would try to gamify a lot of this. Like, I'd really try to confuse opponents from an advanced side because they had advanced scouting of literally looking at and almost anticipating how a pitcher will approach you and how you will react as a hitter. Very fundamental to baseball generally, but I think it's always so heightened in the playoffs. Like, those ABs matter so much. The matchup stuff matters so much. That I think that what they're trying to do from a bullpen standpoint to bring it back to Scott is essentially to give themselves a ton of options versus a variety of kinds of hitters where, if you have a steep path righty who tries to lift the ball a ton, Tanner Scott is a menace for that kind of guy because of how flat his ball approaches the zone. He's got big extension and he has like a slightly vertical slot such that the further he gets down the mound, the flatter that approach is going to be because he's able to backspin the ball really well. Very similar to a guy that was in this most recent draft, Peyton Toll from TCU. It's a big thing the Guardians like as well. They have this guy who was traded recently in the Jimenez flip back where Horowitz, blah, blah, blah. I know you guys don't care about this, you're Dodger fans, but same idea. Like the league is starting to appreciate these like big extension lefties who convert the fastball. And Scott is, I would say, like the king of that because he's had success in leverage moments versus really good left-handed hitters, Ohtani. But I imagine he would have Soto. I'd actually like to see, I don't know if he's ever faced Soto, but Soto's swing is pretty flat. So like, if you're thinking about this from the Galaxy brain angle of like they need a Soto killer, Like, I actually think that'd be a fascinating matchup because I think Soto would be able to match plane because he covers fastballs up so well. So maybe Scott isn't the best matchup for that. But Soto is also 101. All
Yeah.
other left-handed hitters in the NL that become threats in the playoffs, like he's probably going to neutralize them. He's going to neutralize steep path righties. He's a very specific tool that I think they can use in very unique ways. Where it's not like he's going to close and save 30 games. Maybe he saves 18. But Phillips is probably a better matchup in other spots. And, maybe someone else is a better matchup in a certain instance. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of, like, you need multiple chess pieces, like as
Yeah.
prior in that front office. And I think Scott, based on the money they outlay to other guys, is a good fit for the org because of this reason of like he's a weapon in the playoffs. Just because he's gonna be impossibly such a good matchup versus certain kind of hitters
Yeah.
that is like a card that I think the Dodgers would be really, really able to play to their advantage, given the fact that they're probably a guaranteed to get in the playoffs. So that's my perception. I think Scott would be a good fit on the Dodgers.
Well, and the joke is, and then somebody else can't sign him to throw at Ohtani because Ohtani
That's a
struggled
great
against
point.
him, So it's like, hey, let's
Yeah,
take
yeah,
off the
yeah.
guy that gave Ohtani fits as well. He's another guy real quick, like Snell, the walk rate is probably the most alarming number you see on his page. That number has sort of fluctuated. It's gone up, it's gone down, depending on the year. Like, any concern there?
No, there's actually a really good video that Tread Athletics posted with Tyler Zombro, who trains him at Tread, or was at least a remote athlete. I'm not specifically sure if they train together. Zombro's got recently scooped by the Cubs. But the video is great because he talks about how Scott in particular has this thing where if you pause him in his delivery, like right when he gets his front foot down, his knee is like super flexed. Like he's very deep into his lower body when he throws. And as a result of this, what happens is like his arm swing and how he gets to release it's a longer path than like most guys, which again allows slightly more room for error. So what happens sometimes is he like pulls fastballs to his glove side. You usually see arm side misses for fastball. So Scott, if you think throwing to a righty, he tries to throw a fastball middle of the plate, it ends up away from the right-handed hitter. In Scott's case, what he'll do a lot of the time, especially versus lefties, is just pull it into the righty batter box because of some of these things that happen in his lower half. So you see how like the dynamic of him being a really good extension creates this unique fastball that works, but it's also kind of like a kryptonite in some ways where it creates issues in terms of the command. So he's not like Snell in the ability that I think he has good command. I don't think he has great command, but I don't really think that matters for the most part because of how unique the angle is. Like if you haven't seen a guy like Scott, this is kind of what the Cubs have run into at Shota, where he's like a shorter pitcher, short extension, but he verts his fastball too, and he's so low to the ground when he verts the fastball. I remember talking to Pete Armstrong about this. He's like, it looks like it's coming out of Shota's hip when I faced him in lives. And I think that's kind of what you run into with Scott, where it's like, it's just so low. And I'm just, as a hitter, you're not used to that ankle that even if he's out of zone, you just can't visually perceive where the pitch is, So it doesn't really matter to me that Scott doesn't have great command.
Okay. Last question. You've been generous with your time. I appreciate it. The Dodgers, it seems like, are at least open to the idea of adding another starting pitcher. You can never have enough starting pitching. I am very biased and hopeful that pitcher is Walker Buehler and they find a way to bring him back for a million different reasons. But I did want to ask you before you go, as somebody who kind of studies pitching and knows far more about this than me, I'm curious if you think there's any free agent. I'm not talking like Corbin Burns, even Jack Flaherty level, but somebody in the, mid-tier, quote unquote, reclamation project type range that you're like, hey, this is just a guy that I like, that I'd be interested, intrigued at for the money that he's probably going to sign for.
I think I was most intrigued by Bieber, who got scooped back by the Guardians, because I really liked his changes before his Tommy John. I think he signed a 1-1, or did he sign a multi? I think it was a 1-1. So he'll pitch this year and then probably opt out if he pitches well. He also has some protection in case he doesn't pitch well or he relapses from Tommy John, whatever. So I really liked him. Most of the guys that I kind of liked are already off the market. I'm trying to think of who else is available. Buehler and Flaherty are both pretty fascinating. I was on a podcast with Enos Harris and Nick Pollock from Pitcher List, and we were kind of talking through this debate of like, who would you have with the same money? Buehler's a guy where I'm not entirely sure if the fastball he flashed in the postseason is what you're going to see all of 2025. But I said on that podcast that I think the team that knows that the best is the Dodgers, based on what they saw about that change in the postseason, whether anything actually changed, whether it was just a good period of time, whether the weather or the wind influenced it. Like, I'm not entirely sure what the Dodgers said. I'm not totally convinced that all of a sudden he's back to being 2021 Walker Buehler in terms of that fastball shape. So if that's not the case, then you got to figure out what he's going to do versus right-handed hitters. And my angle was like turn him into like a sinker cutter curve guy and like kind of scrap the four seamers. Don't use it a lot. Use it as like an upshot pitch to righties to get whiff. But that'd be a big deviation from what made him good.
Yeah.
But I'll also say like to he was so bad, no offense to him, but he was so bad that like you kind of have to reinvent. Like the best pitchers in baseball reinvent as they age. And I kind of wonder whether this is what he has to do. It's just like
Yeah.
Maybe in these shorter stints, the fastball comes back in the postseason and he's fine with that. But I think as a starting pitcher, he can't be 40% forcing fastball to righties or lefties. Like I think that's got to come down. So
Totally.
I think that like Flaherty maybe has a higher floor, but he's been pretty inconsistent. I like him. I think I'd take him over Bueller, but that's like kind of a fun 1-for-1. I wouldn't say there's a pitcher I'm like in love with on the market that I'm like, gotta sign him. That was
Yeah.
probably Bieber because I thought it'd be cheap, and I really like him for this coming season, assuming health. But yeah, I'd say Flaherty and Bueller are an interesting combo here. I think Burns is probably going to San Fran, be my guess right now.
Okay.
The Red Sox got their guy. The Mets need a pitcher. So like maybe they take Flaherty or Pivetta. I'd say Pivetta is another pretty interesting one. Like vert fastball guys we've been talking about here carries the ball really well. Those guys run into home run problems. So Pivetta it always looks like Pivetta should be a much better pitcher than he is, but I think he just runs into weird situations with that fastball being over the plate and getting touched up. But I still think he's a very good pitcher. He's above average pitcher. There isn't anyone in the market right now that I'm like, yes, slam dunk is what I'll say. But there's some intriguing options depending on where they go.
Yeah. The Walker Bueller stuff is like, I think there's a 50% of me that thinks like he's going to be usable, almost, more so than valuable. And there's 50% of me that's like, I just don't want to see him in a jersey other than the Dodgers for emotional reasons. And so that's where I'm at with Walker Bueller. So
I totally understand that.
Lance, we appreciate the time. You can find him at Lance Broz on social media. Let folks know what you got going on with your YouTube channel. I know you got tons of content that you're putting out there.
Yeah, small little break here for me. I haven't posted anything in a couple of weeks, but I'm going to ramp back up and run it through next season as well. So, I'm almost at 10K followers, which is cool. So get me there. Posting content all the time. Thinking about doing some more short form stuff. We'll see. This is like my time to think through my content strategy and whatnot. But yeah, there and Substack are my main two spots. And it's always good to be on here. You guys are dope.
Yeah. And hey, MLB Network, making some appearances over on MLB Network as well.
It's fun.
Okay. Well, enjoy the winter meetings, Lance. As always, we appreciate the time. Thanks everybody for joining us. Go check out Lance, subscribe to his channel at Lance Broz. Subscribe, ring the notification bell here as well. We'd greatly appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. As always, go Dodgers.